Welcome to Revise and Resubmit, where we take cutting-edge research and try to break it down so you don't have to. I'm Pavlov, and with me as always,
Nikita. All right, so you hear about activist investors all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you always hear about the big changes they're trying to make at companies, right?
Yeah.
Like stock buybacks or maybe layoffs, kind of the big splashy moves.
Right.
But what about the stuff you don't always hear about?
Mm-hmm.
The changes to how a company actually operates,
Yeah.
The nuts and bolts. That's what we're going to explore today.
There's some really interesting research on that, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, by Razvan Lungeanu and Margaret Wiersema.
Okay.
They looked at how these activist campaigns impact a company's operational competitiveness.
Now, before we get too far,
Yeah.
maybe we should back up for a sec.
Sure.
What exactly is operational competitiveness?
It's, it's basically how efficiently and effectively a company runs its core business.
Okay.
So, like, you could have two companies that make, similar products, maybe even the same industry.
Right.
But one might be much better at manufacturing or distribution,
Oh, I see.
things like that.
So
that's what makes a company operationally competitive.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So why should we care about this?
Well, it affects us more than you might think.
Okay.
Operational competitiveness impacts a company's ability to, compete, innovate,
Right.
succeed.
Yeah.
And that translates to everything from the quality, the products we buy, to the prices we pay,
Yeah, okay.
and even, a company's ability to stay in business.
Right. To provide jobs and all that.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about it that way before. So let's talk about the players involved here.
Yeah.
Who are these activist investors?
Well, unlike your typical investor, who might buy some stock and kind of sit back,
Right.
these are investors who take large stakes in companies
Okay.
with a specific goal in mind to push for changes
Okay.
they believe will increase shareholder value. And we're not talking about small changes here.
Okay.
These are often significant changes to how the company operates.
Right.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of hedge funds in this space, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Why is that?
I think it's because hedge funds are structured in a way that incentivizes them to, make these bold moves.
Okay.
Their managers typically earn a percentage of any profits. So there's a strong incentive to see those stock prices rise,
Oh, I see.
and rise quickly.
So they're not content to just sit back and watch.
No, not really.
Okay.
They want to see results.
Gotcha. And they want to see them fast.
Exactly. And that's really important to keep in mind as we look at the research.
Okay.
But before we do that,
Yeah.
maybe we should look at a couple of real-world examples
Okay.
to kind of bring this to life.
Yeah, I always learn better when there's a real
Yeah.
company or situation involved.
So,
Maybe.
picture Southwest Airlines.
Okay.
Big name in the industry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But back in 2024, they found themselves in the crosshairs of Elliott Management,
Elliott Manager.
a major activist hedge fund.
Okay.
Southwest stock price was struggling,
Right.
and Elliott argued that the company's management wasn't doing enough to meet customer needs,
Oh, okay.
which was impacting their performance.
Interesting.
They wrote a pretty scathing letter to the shareholders,
Really?
accusing the leadership of years of mismanagement.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
It was an isolated incident.
Oh.
Elliott Management also targeted Goodyear in 2023.
Okay.
They commended the brand, and their market share,
Uh-huh.
but they didn't hold back on their performance critique.
Okay.
They basically said that owning Goodyear stock had been a disappointment for over a decade.
Ouch.
They went after their operating margins, their spending, their marketing strategy.
Yeah.
You name it.
So they're not afraid to
Not afraid to
ruffle some feathers.
ruffle some feathers. Now,
It seems like
They really want to shake things up and
Yeah.
force these companies to change.
part of the strategy.
Right.
Their goal is to make their concerns very clear and put enough pressure on the company to drive change.
okay.
But let's get to the heart of this deep dive.
Yeah.
What did Lungeanu and Wiersema actually find out
Right.
about how these campaigns impact a company's operations?
Yeah, so I'm curious, does all this pressure just lead to cost cutting? Or are there
That's a good question.
other types of changes happening?
The research found that companies do change their operational competitiveness
Okay.
after being targeted. But it's a lot more nuanced than just slashing costs.
Okay.
In fact, many companies actually adopt entirely new tactics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what kind of tactic?
We're talking about a wide range of changes here.
Okay.
Some companies might implement just-in-time manufacturing
Okay.
to streamline their production processes.
I see.
So they only produce goods when they're needed.
Yeah.
Reducing waste and storage costs.
Okay.
Others might double down on quality control,
Okay.
introducing stricter measures to ensure their products meet a higher standard.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all.
not at all.
Okay.
The specific operational changes a company makes are really tailored to their situation
Right.
and the pressures they're facing.
Gotcha.
But there is one common thread.
Oh, okay.
A lot of these companies will shift towards emphasizing short-term tactics.
Short term.
Yeah,
Which makes sense given that the hedge funds want results quickly.
exactly.
Like, what kind of short-term tactics are we talking about?
So you can imagine a company that's under pressure to boost sales, right?
Yeah.
They might decide to focus on revamping their product design
Okay.
and packaging to make it more appealing.
Okay.
Or they might choose to invest in improving their existing products
Right.
rather than launching something totally new. Another common tactic is to maximize the utilization of their existing production capacity.
Okay.
Basically, they're trying to squeeze every bit of efficiency out of their current setup
Right.
to maximize output and minimize costs.
So it sounds like all of these changes that we've been talking about are focused on, efficiency cost cutting.
Well, that's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
But one of the most surprising findings
Yeah.
is that many of the operational changes actually required significant investments.
Wait, really? I thought the whole thing with activist investors was
Yeah.
that they just wanted to cut costs.
Well, that's the common perception.
Right.
But this research suggests it's not always the case.
Interesting.
Sometimes the best way to make a company more competitive is to invest,
Okay.
not just cut.
So it's kind of, it goes against what a lot of people think.
It does.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah. So
Are there any other things that influence how a company changes after one of these campaigns?
the researchers found that a company's stock return plays a big role.
Okay.
If a company is already performing well, they're less likely to make drastic changes,
Really, even with the pressure?
even with the pressure. Yeah.
I would think that they'd
I
be
think so.
more open to it.
Yeah. But it's not so much about receptiveness to ideas,
Oh.
it's about the power dynamic.
Okay.
If a company's stock is already doing well,
Right.
the activists' arguments hold less weight.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So it's all about credibility.
Exactly.
The worse they're doing, the more power the activist has.
Yeah, a lower stock return gives the activists more ammunition.
Gotcha.
More influence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about
Mm.
companies adopting new tactics, but is that the only way they respond?
Not at all.
Okay.
Lungeanu and Wiersema also found that companies often double down on their existing tactics.
Oh,
So it's not just about trying new things.
right.
It's about putting more resources behind what they're already doing.
Okay, can you give me an example of that?
Sure, let's look at VS Holdings,
Okay. VS Holdings.
better known as Vitamin Shop.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They were already focused on reducing manufacturing costs.
Okay.
But after the campaign, they really kicked things into high gear. They started looking for efficiencies everywhere.
Okay.
Streamlining processes,
Right.
scrutinizing their product sourcing, even doing a complete overhaul of some of their business operations.
So the activist campaign really pushed them to.
It acted as a catalyst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how do we know that companies are actually doing all this?
Right.
Are they really implementing these changes?
That's a great question.
Or are they just talking a big game?
Yeah, are they just putting on a show?
Right.
That's something the researchers considered as well.
Okay.
They didn't just take companies at their word.
Okay.
They actually dug into specific examples.
All right, give me an example.
Let's look at Enzon Pharmaceuticals back in 2008.
Enzon Pharmaceuticals.
They promised in their 10K filing
Okay.
that they would invest in what they called effective lifecycle management plans for their products.
Life cycle management.
Yeah, so basically this meant finding ways to differentiate and extend the lifespan of their existing products.
Okay.
Which was particularly important.
Yeah.
Because many of their products were already in the later stages of their life cycles.
So what happened?
Well, a year later, in their 2009 10K,
Okay.
Enzon proudly reported that lifecycle management had become a core part of their business, and that they had implemented plans for all of their marketed brands.
Oh, wow.
They even went so far as to say that this approach was essential
Okay.
for achieving sustainability and maximizing the value of their products.
So they actually did it.
They did it.
Wow.
And keep in mind, this is just one example.
Right.
Lungeanu and Wiersema looked at several companies in detail and found evidence that many of them were genuinely making operational changes.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm already starting to think about activist investors in a whole new light,
Yeah,
but I'm sure there's a lot more to this conversation.
definitely.
So we'll pick it up and delve into some of the broader implications of this research
Okay.
after a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
Right.
It's really interesting how this research shows that activists can actually push for changes that are good for the company.
Right. It's not always about just, tearing things down.
Yeah, and that really challenges the whole corporate raider image.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced than that.
But I'm still kind of stuck on that tension,
Yeah.
between the potential for good and that pressure for short-term results.
Mm-hmm.
How do those two things work together?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, because focusing on the short term
Right.
doesn't always lead to the best long-term decisions.
True. But even those short-term tactics can involve big investment.
Oh.
Think about Vitamin Shock.
Right,
They poured a lot of resources into overhauling their operations.
to cut costs.
Right. But those changes are going to benefit them for a long time.
Yeah, not just right now.
Exactly.
So maybe it's not always this either thing.
Yeah.
Maybe a company can make changes that work for both the activist and the long-term health of the company.
I think that's what this research is pointing to.
It's like finding that perfect balance.
Finding that sweet spot.
And that probably looks different for every company,
Absolutely.
depending on their industry and how they're already set up.
Exactly.
So if we kind of zoom out a little bit,
Yeah.
what are the bigger implications of all this?
Well, I think it changes how we think about the companies we interact with every day.
Oh, okay. So,
These findings give us a different way to look at activist investors.
okay.
They might not always be the bad guys.
Right.
They can actually play a positive role in pushing companies to be better.
Which ultimately
Right.
benefits all of us.
Exactly.
So instead of just thinking about stock buybacks and cuts,
Right.
we should also pay attention to these operational changes that are happening.
The behind the scenes stuff,
Yeah, because those changes, they can be just as important.
if not more so.
Yeah, in the long run.
Definitely.
It's almost like looking under the hood of a car. Most people don't know how a car engine works.
Right.
But we know that if it's tuned up, it runs better.
Right.
It's the same with companies.
That's a great analogy.
In this research,
Yeah.
it helps us understand that tune-up process.
It really does.
It shows how activists and operational changes and a company's value are all connected. It's been a real eye-opener for me.
Me too.
I'm seeing activist investors in a whole new light.
Yeah.
Is there anything else from the research that you think is really important for people to understand?
I think the fact that the researchers didn't just rely on what companies said they were doing is crucial.
Right. They actually checked.
They went and investigated.
Yeah, like with Enzon. Right.
Where they looked for proof that those life cycle management plans were actually happening.
Exactly. And that gives us more confidence in these findings because it wasn't just talk.
Right.
These companies were actually doing it.
Which makes their conclusions that much stronger.
Absolutely.
It's all about looking beyond the surface, right? Not just reading headlines.
Right.
We need to dig into the details.
Yeah, trying to understand what's really going on.
And I think that's what we do here.
I think so too.
We help you understand those deeper stories.
Yeah.
Give you the tools to be more informed.
Absolutely.
I've learned a lot today.
Me too.
I'm starting to see activist investors in a whole new way.
It's fascinating stuff.
I'm eager to hear your final thoughts.
Okay.
But first, I want to give our listeners a chance to think about everything we've talked about.
Yeah,
It's a lot to take in.
definitely.
It's funny how we always try to paint these activist investors as either the good guys or the bad guys. Yeah, it's either they're going to, save the company or they're going to run it into the ground.
Right, but it's obviously more complicated than that.
Way more.
And this research really digs into that.
Yeah.
We've seen how activists can push for changes that are actually good for the company, not just about cutting costs.
Right.
And what's really cool is that the researchers actually checked to make sure those changes were happening.
Yeah, they didn't just take their word for it.
Right. It wasn't just a PR stunt.
Exactly.
It was about real action,
It really highlights what we always say about critical thinking.
right?
When you hear about an activist going after a company, don't just take it at face value.
You gotta,
Dig a little deeper.
ask questions.
Figure out what's really going on.
Because who knows, maybe this activist
Yeah.
is actually going to make the company better.
It's possible.
They could push for higher quality products or better treatment of employees.
It's not always about the bottom line.
Right, it's a totally different way of looking at these investors.
For sure.
So what's the big takeaway here?
Well, I think it's important to remember that activist investors aren't all the same.
Okay.
Each campaign is different.
Right.
And the results can be totally different too.
So some might just be focused on short-term profits,
Yeah, they just want to make a quick buck.
but others might actually care about the long-term health of the company.
Yeah, they want to see it succeed.
So the next time you hear about an activist targeting a company, don't jump to conclusions.
Right.
Take a step back, look at what they're actually proposing,
Exactly.
and ask yourself, could this actually be a good thing?
It's a question worth asking.
It really is. Well, that's about all the time we have for today.
Wow, that went by fast.
I know, right? But we covered a lot of ground,
We did.
and hopefully this deep dive gave you a new perspective on activist investors.
Yeah, and how they can impact the companies we all know.
So until next time, keep asking questions. Keep exploring.
And keep diving deep.
We'll see you then.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.